Okay, I think we can go. I'm Marta Debolini from CMCC, from the Institute for Climate Resilience. I will give you just a very short introduction about CMCC and its organization, and then I'll leave the floor to Lara for her speech. So the CMCC is an international research center focused on the understanding of the interaction between climate science, climate change, and the society, and is a non-profit research foundation with a global network of scientists and research organizations, as you can see. So all experts that are working together to understand the interaction between climate change and society. The CMCC mission is not only to understand the climate system, but also to combine climate modeling, impact assessment, and environmental economics to support science-driven adaptation and mitigation action, and so to arrive until actionable solution for society. The CMCC has grown during the last years. This year is the 20 years of its existence, and it's organized around the 3 multidisciplinary research institutes, 4 strategic programs, a computing infrastructure dedicated exclusively to the study of climate change, and then 2 specialized centers on digital innovation and high-level education and training. So I will go more in detail about this organization. The research institute, as I said, are 3. The Institute for Earth System Prediction, the Institute for Climate Resilience, and the European Institute on Economics and the Environment. About the 4 strategic program, here you can see 4 of them. So the first one is about the integration of the planetary biogeochemical and industrial carbon cycle. Then we have a specific program on global coast as the new frontier. The 3rd program is about the prediction of socioeconomic outcomes in a changing climate, and then the more methodological strategic program about the integration of artificial intelligence and machine learning in the modeling chain. Then we have 3 high-level center, one about of a performance computing center, which is the most powerful computational facility in Italy, fully dedicated to climate change research. Then we have an advanced digital innovation center and an advanced training and education center. Today, the seminar will be given by Lara Chehade, who is an associate scientist at the Institute for Climate Resilience, and in particular, she is working at the division dealing with the impact of climate change in agriculture, forest, and ecosystem services. She holds a PhD in agronomy from the University in Pisa, when she worked until 2023, when she joined CMCC. And the keywords of research are about agroecological transition, legumes and tillage, cover crops, and innovative food systems. Today, the seminar, the title of the seminar that she will give is about the pathways for the transition to climate resilient agricultural system. Just a very brief logistic slide. So for all the attendants to the seminar, the audio and video are deactivated by default, but if you want to ask questions about the presentation, you can use the Q&A section of your Zoom application. So I'll leave the floor to Lara.
Okay, hi everyone. Let me share presentation. I don't know if you... Okay. Do you see my presentation?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, so hi everyone. In this talk, I will present some potential pathways for the transition to climate resilient agricultural systems. First, I will start by looking at why a transition. Okay, I don't know. These are the key points we'll cover today. I will start by looking at why a transition in our agricultural system is needed. Then I will explore how we can make that transition happen by looking also at some evidence from field experiments showing the ecological and the climatic benefits of some farming practices. And I will wrap up by a case study showing how changes in farming system can support the benefits and the collective targets at a larger scale. So to start, let's look at why a transition in our agricultural system is needed. We know that our food systems today are responsible for almost a third of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and most of these emissions come from the production activities, so from agriculture, fishing, and aquaculture, and the production of inputs that serve, for crops to be on our plates. These account for almost 40% of the food system emissions. The second source of emissions are the land use change to cropland, mostly from deforestation, peatland drainage, and the grassland conversion to croplands, constituting around 32% of the food systems, and the remaining emissions come from distribution, processing, and consumption, which make up the remaining 29%. Within farming itself, the biggest share come from animals, especially livestock, or ruminants like sheep or cows. They produce methane from a natural process that happens in their stomach when they during digestion. Another additional methane comes from the storage of manure. The second biggest source in agriculture is nitrous oxide from soils, coming from the applications of synthetic fertilizers or organic fertilizers and grazing. And nitrous oxide emissions is a very potent greenhouse gas, having the potential to trap heats almost 3,000 more than carbon dioxide. This is, I think, the most potent greenhouse gas emission in the agricultural systems. Now, at the same time, agricultural intensification and changes in land use are responsible for environmental degradation. A worrying figure from the EU shows almost 60% of soils are in unhealthy state, and the situation is even more alarming from agricultural soils. As you can see on this map, I think we can see how only 10% of agricultural soils in Europe can be classified as healthy. Normally, unhealthy soils have reduced organic carbon, or let's say they have one or more degradation processes. And one of the most common issues is the loss of organic carbon and the loss of soil biodiversity. And according to European Environment Agency, agricultural intensification is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss in Europe. Pressures from intensive agriculture, simplification of landscapes, and the transition to or the loss of grasslands have driven loss of biodiversity, loss of pollinators, loss of bird species, and loss of other important species. So in addition, our agricultural systems are becoming increasingly vulnerable to the very pressures they help create. The loss of soil fertility and biodiversity, as you saw earlier, are reducing the land capacity to regenerate and support crops. And these impacts would worsen under climate change risks, especially under droughts, under heat waves, and floods. So without a shift toward more sustainable farming practices, our food production risks to become less productive, less stable, and less adaptable to future climate and ecological changes. According to the sixth assessment report synthesis of the IPCC, the current and the projected greenhouse gas emissions make it likely that warming will exceed the 1.5 degrees this century, and will make it increasingly difficult to limit the rise below the 2 degrees. According to the same report, to address these challenges, to adapt to climate change or to mitigate emissions, we need some integrated measures across the whole food system level. We need to introduce sustainable agriculture with sustainably sourced agriculture and forestry products, and to ensure that terrestrial ecosystems, which act as carbon sinks, are conserved, are protected, and restored. So how do terrestrial ecosystems, including agricultural land, act as carbon sinks? Simply put, terrestrial ecosystems absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis, and they convert it to organic matter and store it in the plant biomass and in the soil organic carbon. Soil organic carbon is the result of the degradation and the microbial degradation and stabilization of the organic matter coming from dead plant residues, from roots, release of organic compounds, the rise of deposition from microbial biomass, and other organic compounds released from bacteria. And if you consider the agricultural systems, another inputs come also from another carbon source come from the organic inputs introduced through manure, through compost, or from grazing. So healthy soils can keep the carbon locked away for long periods, acting as a natural carbon sink. But when soils are disturbed, are eroded, or depleted, the stored carbon would come back to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide and would contribute to further warming. So in order for mitigation to occur, we can introduce actions that fall into two categories. Actions that increase the agroecosystem's carbon stocks through the storage of additional atmospheric carbon dioxide in the carbon pools. And this mechanism is called carbon sequestration, and it exploits the carbon sink of the capacity of the terrestrial ecosystem, of which we talked in the last slide. This could happen by adding more organic carbon inputs in the vegetation and the soil. Another category of actions could prevent additional greenhouse gas from being released into the atmosphere, and this mechanism can be called emission avoidance or reduction. By avoiding changes in land use, by reducing the inputs and increasing the higher efficiency, or by using practices with low greenhouse gas emissions. Now, what's agroecology and how does it contribute to climate change and mitigation? Agroecology is an approach to farming that integrates ecological principles, or that applies ecological principles to agricultural systems, integrating cooperation on multiple levels, from the soil to the farm, to the community and the food system, the value chain. As shown in the picture, we can see how the principles of agroecology can be divided into two categories. Those that fall into the farm and the agroecosystem level, and those at the upper level that fall into the wider food system level. Now, as for the farm level, we can see how agroecology favors recycling, input reduction, soil health, biodiversity, among other principles, and how it values the connectivity, the land and natural resource governance, the co-creation of knowledge, participation, social values, and changes in diets at the food value, at the food system level. Now, our focus will be mostly on the agroecosystem level, but both they work together to make resilient systems. Now, the set of agricultural practices. So, agroecology improved the agricultural systems by harnessing the natural processes. So it minimized the inputs and used also the ecological processes and the ecological functions like nutrient recycling, like biological pest control, for example. It harnessed these systems in order to and result at the end with better ecosystem services. So we might have better pest management, better production, and also a climate regulation, creating eventually a system that is more self-regulating, resource efficient, and climate resilient. Now, these practices would also enable us to respond to the targets and the ambitions that the EU has set to respond to address the climate and environmental issues, like achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, as the climate European law states, or to respond to the aims of the Farm to Fork strategy and the supporting biodiversity and soil strategy set for 2030. One of these, if we look at these targets, can see the targets like very ambitious. And agroecological practices can help, I think, targeting these, help respond to these targets, like reducing the chemical pesticides by 50%, reducing nutrient losses and fertilizer use by 20%, or even increasing the diversity of landscape, the diversity in our landscape, and by 10%. And many of these agroecological practices are already included in the eco schemes or the agri-environment climate measures and the rural development plans of the Common Agricultural Policy in the EU, and can align with the aim of the carbon removal voluntary certification framework that's being developed now to reword the carbon sequestration efforts in soil and vegetation. Now, these are some examples of practices that can offer the climate benefits and help in the ecological intensification of our landscapes. One of them, I'll start with one of the most famous are cover crops, and these are crops that normally are grown between two cashew crops during fallow periods, and they initially were thought as a soil protection measure to avoid soil erosion and conserve soil health. So, but they can also provide many ecosystem services, and we'll see later on that can contribute also to climate mitigation. Another practice is the reduction of tillage intensity and the frequency, like the use of conservation tillage. These are practices that reduce the depth and the intensity and the frequency of tillage in an agroecosystem, and to slow down the release of the destruction of the soil health, of soil structure, and of organic carbon. Another also practices that integrate or that let's say exploit better resource use, like mixed farming system integrating crops and animals, can also fall under the ecological intensification and climate mitigation target. Practices that integrate trees with the crops or with pastures or with animals, like agroforestry systems are also another example, and other biodiversity-based practices like like ensuring longer, richer crop rotations, including legumes in these rotations, intercroppings, and grasslands. So how can cover crops avoid emissions from inputs through better ecosystem services? Here are some examples from studies we conducted a few years back, where we tested how cover crops can control weeds by exploiting some natural phenomena, which is called biochemical and biochemistry and ecology allelopathy. So it's the release of phytotoxic compounds that would eventually slow down or inhibit the release of cover crops. And here we conducted this in vitro test where we tested the three types of cover crops commonly used in Mediterranean agroecosystems. These were the rye, the squirrels, clover, and the mixture of both of them. And we saw how the extracts of these cover crops were able to decrease germination and to decrease either the germination or to slow down this germination and to inhibit the growth of some summer weed species also commonly found in the Mediterranean agroecosystems. And this is, I think, important because this means that these cover crops have the potential to be either introduced in our ecosystems to control weeds without the use of pesticides, or either to be manufactured as bioherbicides. And we were also interested to, in the same experiment, we were also interested to understand how these natural phenomena, these, let's say, natural processes were able to, or they how interact with some common, or with some like cropping practices. And what we did actually is to compare how these cover crops normally end up in the agroecosystem, which are normally tilled in the agroecosystem, with an innovative, or let's say a new system where these cover crops are laid as a mat on top of the soil, and the crop they is transplanted or sown on top of it. And the idea behind this is to first to exploit these biochemical mechanisms, but also to regulate the factors or the conditions that impact the weed growth and the weed germination. What we found actually is that abundance was higher under these systems, higher than the traditional methods. But what we found interesting is that the biodiversity of cover crops interacted with this type of management. And here I say, I stress on the importance of this because agroecology is based on biodiversity. And here we saw how this functional biodiversity, by including two types of cover crops, helped also to reduce some category of the weeds in a way that is similar, I think, to traditional methods. Opening also and that could be potential also for introduction of cover crops as a weed management method compared to herbicides or to conventional tillage that also accelerate the loss of organic matter during the season. In another experiment where the same cover crops were tested, we saw how cover crops not only reduce the use for or the need for additional herbicides, but how they can also reduce the need for fertilizers. And here in this graph, we can see how the use of cover crops, of legume-based cover crops, whether the squirrels, clover, or the mixture, which has a small portion of the cover crop, ensured the same or higher yield of tomato as the only fertilization treatment, and especially under stress condition. And this is due to many processes at play. First, because cover crops can catch nitrogen that would otherwise would be lost during the winter season, but also because cover crops they benefit from the nitrogen fixation the microbial nitrogen fixation, the natural microbial nitrogen fixation, but also as the efficiency of converting this nitrogen also to biomass. These were some evidence reported from the field. Now, how can we leverage the benefits that these practices offer in the field to enhance the environmental sustainability and of our landscape and achieve climate targets? This section, what we see in this section is mostly another piece of evidence of the importance of farming practices as a climate mitigation tool, and also an approach for decision making that will help us understand the consequences of introducing changes in our agroecosystems. This study is based on life cycle assessment, and it goes into two steps. First, it quantifies the environmental footprint of, it allows to quantify the environmental footprint of our farms or territories, and then to explore the mitigation potential of introducing change in land management. To do so, the first step follows the life cycle assessment methodology from the cradle to gate, and allow us to quantify the emissions of a farm of a territory by quantifying the emissions from the inputs used for the production of crops or from animal production, and all the processes that might generate emissions from both activities. So from the production and use of fertilizer, pesticide, fuel, imported feed, but also the emissions from enteric fermentation on our farms, from the manure management systems, and from the electricity use. These followed the calculations here followed the IPCC guidelines and international, and we also used some information from international databases and literature to get all the needed information for the calculation of the emission factors or the emissions of each of these processes. And this is the second step. The second step is based on a compilation of an inventory of mitigation actions that could be applicable to the territory or to the landscape, let's say, based on the common agricultural practices or the common activities that are found. And besides these mitigation actions, we had also we extracted also from scientific literature a coefficient of mitigation, which is either the rate of reduction associated with this mitigation action or the sequestration of carbon that results from an action. And to understand and to explore what happens to the carbon footprint of our farm or territory if we apply these mitigation actions, we use this formula. So a mitigation from one practice is actually the product of this coefficient of mitigation by the application to the surface area we hypothesize that we hypothesize it will be used. And once we need to understand the whole carbon footprint of our farm or territory, we can make simply the addition of all these mitigation practices. And we applied this methodology or this approach to Sardinia. For those who don't know, Sardinia is an island in the Mediterranean. This is it in Italy. And we had first to understand also the specificities of this island, and we saw that agricultural land accounts for around 50% of Sardinia's area, and that over 60% of this area is used for fodder production, precisely as a grasslands. And this is because Sardinia relies on a very large, strong, very large animal sector, precisely from sheep husbandry, dedicated to dairy production. So those sheep, they are reared normally in these semi-extensive production systems and that are based on grazing. So to follow the two steps I said earlier, the first one, to get the picture of the emissions of our territory, of our landscape, we had to gather information from about all the agricultural activities in that landscape from open databases and from local experts that they helped us to understand also how some production systems were managed, or how manual management what manual management systems were adopted. And we collected all the other information that are necessary to calculate the emissions from national databases. And here we got our baseline emissions. From this calculation, we saw how over 70% of the agricultural emissions were of animal origin, precisely from the enteric and the manual management systems adopted in Sardinia. Much of or the most of these emissions come from the sheep sector, the semi-extensive sheep sector, precisely, and inputs account for almost 25% of total agricultural emissions. And diesel was actually the first contributor to this emission, and the third contributor after the enteric fermentation and the manual management system to the emissions in Sardinia. So like this, we got a picture of the emissions in the territory, and we identified the major hotspots that needs to be targeted. Now, to understand what happens to our carbon footprint if we apply mitigation actions, as said earlier, we compiled a list of mitigation actions that could be applied in Sardinia, and could target also the environmental hotspot that we found in the previous slide. We introduced two mitigation measures that, according to the literature, were the most effective in reducing enteric fermentation in both housing and grazing production systems. And we thought that they could be used in Sardinia's animal production systems. These were the taniferous forages and the dietary, and the inclusion of dietary and the rations of the animals. We then describe each of these practices to describe them, and we also give the mean effect that might be the mean reduction that we might expect from the application of this measure on animal populations. These two measures, so they target the enteric fermentation of the livestock in Sardinia. Other mitigation measures, they are measures that can be applied in the agroecosystems, and these include measures somehow singular, let's say, like the use of organic amendments, of the introduction of cover crops, the use of the permanent soil cover in orchards, and this measure is also supported by one of the eco schemes in the CAP in Italy, to change it to also. We proposed also an alternative water management regime for rice, and a measure to regenerate the pastures using mixtures. And we found the sequestration rates of each of these measures. We also introduced measures that might be a little bit more transformative, like organic farming and conservation agriculture. Compared to the other practices, these can include more a holistic approach, or even more measures at the same time. We also propose some measures to promote biodiversity in this territory, like the use of herbaceous strips, or even to extensify the forage production systems. So transformation of animal forage to either permanent pasture, or to pastures, or to silvopastures or agroforestry systems, like cork oak, like the cork oak silvopasture, which are also a traditional systems found in Italy, found in Sardinia precisely. And based on these mitigation measures, we hypothesized a certain rate of application for these mitigation measures. We divided them into two scenarios. First, we suppose that in the first scenario, only diet reformulations of animals were introduced. So only tannin-rich forages and vegetable oils are used on cattle, goat, and sheep. And another scenario, we estimated as any changes that might occur from introducing changes in land management. So by adopting all the other practices cited earlier. And what we found actually is that the first scenario, which includes only mitigation measures that target animal emissions, were able to reduce the emissions by only 2%, and introducing land management practices were able to reduce the emissions by almost 37%. By almost 37%, mainly through carbon removal. And this graph on the right shows also the contribution of the singular practices, and we can see how practices like organic farming had the highest impact on reducing the local emissions. This following the target that was set by the biodiversity strategy, and other mitigation measures that are more transformative also, that together they can follow and under this Agr Plus category, and can have the highest share of emission reduction. So to conclude, we can say that this approach provides a pathway to resilient agriculture and food systems in Mediterranean agroecosystem, both by providing a mitigation, an adaptation solution, and also a mitigation solution to greenhouse gas emissions. We saw how collective targets can also be reached in areas where intensive livestock activities occur, through sustainable land management and the introduction of agroecological practices, mainly through the exploitation of the potential of these systems to sequester carbon. And this was the case in Sardinia, where we saw how the introduction of sustainable land management through some agroecological practices were able to reduce 40% of the local emissions. It's also important to say that transition to resilient agricultural systems, as also agroecology states, is a transition that goes beyond the farms, beyond the technical and technological innovations that happen on the farm, and it's more a systematic change that includes social and political changes as well. And as future perspectives, we hope to explore other ecosystem services and to enrich this tool. Also, by doing some links to the economic consequences that might arise by changing land management, and exploring other potential practices that can diversify of our agricultural systems, and maybe can contribute also to low emissions food systems. That's everything. Thank you for your attention. I was a little bit long.
Thank you very much, Lara. And I think we can go directly to the questions, because we have already some of them. So there is a question more related to policy, which I can take maybe, because it's about given the recent shift in European priority and rollback on environmental regulation, in what ways has the common agricultural policy and the farm to fork strategy been altered or constrained? It's true that after, let's say, the change and also some measure that has been very much contested by the farmers, there was some changes in some of the proposition of the strategy of the common agricultural policy and the farm to fork strategy, in particular related to a more flexible implementation of some measure. I think, for example, to the measure that was proposed about putting some part of the farm compulsory dedicated to natural features, and this measure has become, let's say, more flexible and not compulsory to farmers, and also some measure of the farm to fork strategy related, for example, to fertilizer and pesticide reduction have been reframed or made more flexible. And also for the common agricultural policy post 2027, the proposition is to give more budget, let's say more tools to ensure stability, economic stability to farmers, and less premiality, let's say, for poorly environmental goals. So some changes has been already registered. So another question is about the carbon sequestration coefficient. If there is any reference about this carbon sequestration coefficient, and if you think, Lara, that mitigation effect should be applied only on scope 1 emission. So yes, this is the other question.
I didn't get the second one, but I will respond to the first one. So yes, surely these were the coefficient of mitigation. That's how I call them. So the rate of reduction of the carbon removal, they were retrieved from meta-analysis mostly, or from literature that corresponds to the Mediterranean area, or if possible also to Sardinia. And yes, we had reference. I didn't present them, but for each we have some. Yes. I don't know if this was the question. You know.
Obviously, if there are other questions, we can also answer after by email if you want, or if the answer were not really related to what you were asking. So another question is about a reference handbook of adaptation action or strategy in agroecological system. If there is a handbook about the possible adaptation action and strategies.
Handbook of the possible, like published
Yeah,
handbook.
in my knowledge, there are some probably some publication, but not an overall handbook. I don't know if, Lara, you have some other.
Well, I don't know if the agroecology was a theme that has been discussed in many international forums, let's say, and I think we can find something was published by the FAO, by FAO, or there are some also the high panel. There's also some the high panel of experts also of something that they also published. Like a handbook on the importance of agroecology for adaptation. Yes, there are actually many references on this. Yes.
And then what are, in your opinion, in our opinion, the main barriers to the transition towards agroecological practices? So are cost, entrenched habits, lack of awareness? What are the main barriers?
Yes, I think it's more like a combination of many things. Many farmers maybe or stakeholders, yes, still they don't acknowledge maybe the importance of these practices, or maybe the possible benefits that these practices might give, aside from the economic benefits that might arise. Um, yes, that's one. And I think also another one is this technical, maybe, because not all practices can be easily um, implemented, and many also they are very context specific. So this is another problem. Some problem also at the more experimental side. We still maybe lack some data on how these systems maybe can be the best or can be optimal in certain conditions, and what are the trade-offs maybe of these. Um, yes, that's it, I think.
And there is another question related to this one, which maybe I can answer because we know both how it is going. Because is if the farmers have been involved in our in this study, and how. So for the moment, the study was not considered involving farmers, but was mostly a modeling analysis. But actually, we have some proposed project that we hope to be performing in the near future, in which we will implement a living lab in this area, actually to involve farmers, but also in order to understand really the other questions. So what are really the main barriers, and trying to give some example in how this barrier can be overcome, let's say. And there is, I don't know if we can take all the questions because there are a lot, but I will try to take some of them. So, for example, if you tackle the problem of baselining your calculation, so for example, if you have accounted for retention timings of the capture carbon in the analysis.
No, I didn't. Sorry, Marta, can you just repeat?
So the
Can't see.
question is this one: how did you tackle the problem of baselining in your calculation? Have you accounted for retention timings of the capture carbon in the analysis?
Okay,
So the
that's
time.
yes, yes. We follow the IPCC maybe methodology, and it's a little bit standardized, let's say, calculations. So retention times were, let's say, or let's say for carbon sequestration, we actually valued from studies that look at the carbon sequestration at a long period, so as to have like the longest carbon sequestration potential to see it. But there are studies we can't have studies that like see the carbon sequestration after 100 years at least, so they must come in from a maximum of 20 years at least. And we use these coefficients to estimate how in a range of, or in a horizon of 20 years, this carbon sequestration would be per year. So we took, in other words, we took this coefficient of mitigation from the literature, or this, let's say, the carbon sequestration, and then we supposed that this would be the highest sequestration that would be reached once this system applies this method or this change in land use, and we divided it by 20 years. assuming that according to the IPCC, that in a horizon of 20 years, we might carbon sequestration might or the systems like enter in a let's say equilibrium, let's say.
Yeah, there is
I don't know
another
if I was like
there is another
I don't know
comment
if
on this. There is a comment on this topic, which is about the carbon sequestration rate. So it is important to note the sequestration to soil following a change, either land use or land management, does not continue indefinitely. So the time frame is defined by the T transition period in the soil organic carbon sequestration rate equation. So this is a possible comment to consider in the further development of the study. And I think most
exactly,
of the
but just also one another thing that we considered also like a linear, almost a linear increase in carbon sequestration. This is, yes, a limitation, but it's also some like a method just to get a picture of the potential of these practices. Exactly, this is not like what happens in real conditions, but it might be helpful also to evaluate this mitigation practice.
And yes, I will say that most of the other comments and questions are related to the connection with farmers and the sharing of this information. Actually, we have quite continuous dialogue with local farmers which are involved in several projects that we are developing in this territory. So we are sharing quite continuously the information that we develop during our research. And as I said before, we are already also planning to have really a living lab in this area in order to have the farmers not only informed about the research, but directly co-constructing and participating to the research process. And I think that we are almost at the end. I will read just another question because related to completely other subject, which is are the effects of the proposed mitigation on the production quality, so for example on meat and milk, known? I think no, but I don't know, Lara, if you have some insight about that.
Okay, so the measures that I've adopted, they must, like production-wise, they didn't have an impact on the meat quality. I don't know. Actually, I don't know.
Yeah, we have some contact with some livestock scientists, so specialists of the sector, because I guess that probably changing from a more intensified system to a more extensive, in which the species of the livestock production meat are more diversified, are also impacting the quality of the product, but we are not dealing with this part for the moment. So I think that we took more or less. Okay, we have some other question also related to specific areas, but considering that probably we are at the end of our timing, I think we can took all the question and answer to your question by email. And do not hesitate to contact if you have any interest on the research. We can share all the material that we have. Thank you very much for attending to this seminar, and we will see maybe at the next one. Bye bye. Thank you.